Welcome back to the Relentless Believer Podcast, where we share real stories of faith, resilience, and the courage to walk boldly in your calling, even when it doesn't fit the mold. Today's conversation is centered around faith, influence, and what it really means to reach people where they are. Before we dive in, I want to take a moment to properly introduce today's guest because you may have heard her name recently, but I want you to understand who she is at the core. I'm joined today by Magdalene Rose, a Christian metalcore artist whose music speaks directly into real struggles that so many people, especially young listeners, are walking through right now. Things like identity, mental health, pain, and faith. Magdalene, I am so glad you're here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Now, for some people listening, metalcore may not be what you typically associate with Christian music, but what stands out about what you're doing is that you're not trying to make the message more comfortable. You're focused on making it real and reaching people right where they are. And I think that's great. That's what makes this conversation so important. Your name has been coming up more recently as you've been touring with Seventh-day Slumber, and in a couple of situations, churches have chosen to cancel their events if you're a part of the lineup. And while that's part of the conversation, what I really want to focus on today is something that's a little more deeper than that. This idea that it truly takes all kinds to reach all kinds in the kingdom of God. And how we navigate faith without falling into judgment based on what something looks like on the outside. So I want to start here for anyone hearing about you for the first time. Tell us about who you are and what has God called you to do through your music.
Yeah, so my name is Magdalene Rose, and I make rock slash metal slash metalcore, anything in the heavier genre, but it is all tied into my faith in Jesus. And I struggled a lot with my mental health growing up, and I found a lot of solace in bands that sounded like rock. And some of them were Christian, some of them weren't. And so as I started to find healing and find a place in this like music scene, I felt like God was calling me to speak into those places where I was also finding solace and going back into those places and saying, hey, there's hope. It doesn't have to be this thing where you're just stuck. Yes, it's important to know that there are people who feel the same way as you do, but it's also important to know that there is a way out and there is freedom. And I felt like that was what God was calling me to do. And I grew up in a band with my sisters called GFM, and we did something sort of similar to that. And in 2022, it really felt like, God had kind of imploded my world because he called us all out of that. And I thought that was my calling. I thought that was what I was supposed to do for the rest of my life. And I never wanted to be a solo artist ever because that was so scary to me. And it just became apparent that that was where God was leading me. And there was a lot of loss I had to experience through that situation. There's a lot of confusion, but I only had God to hold on to, and he really carried me through that whole season. And now I can share my story with people, overcoming depression, overcoming an eating disorder. I'm sharing my friends' stories who have struggled with self-harm, and now they are self-harm free. And you know, I I think it's important with my music at least to share about these topics that are hard to talk about because they are so isolating. And whenever you bring them into the light, it's easier to talk about them and you feel less alone. And when you see somebody who has come out of something similar to you, it's easier to think that maybe you can do that too. And maybe that freedom really is available to you.
That's awesome. Everybody's story is a little bit different, and it's always great to hear the backstory. So let's start with the beginning. What first pulled you into music?
So my dad was a really big fan of like 80s rock and going to, hair metal concerts growing up, and he never really grew out of that. And so when me and my sisters came along, he was like, "Oh my goodness, I'm gonna take you guys to concerts." And it's like, but I don't really listen to those bands anymore, and I don't know if you would like Petra, so I need to find bands that you would like. And there were a couple girls that went to the church that I grew up going to, and they liked Skillet, and he was like, "Oh, who is this band?" And so when he found out they were a Christian band that was like a big rock band that had the big pyrotechnics, he was like, "This is what I'm taking you guys to." So that was, I think, my very first rock concert, and I was like, "Oh, this is so cool." And then I just started to do research. We all were playing different instruments, and my dad was like, "Wouldn't it be so cool if we had a band?" And so we were a little cover band for a little bit, and yeah, I got some recommendations from people when we were playing shows. They're like, "You sound like Flyleaf, you sound like Firefly." And I was like, "I don't know who those are." And so when I went to look those up, it was very different from what I was used to, but I was like, "I think I like this. I think I'm gonna keep doing my research into this type of music," and I just fell in love with it.
That's awesome. Music is my hobby, and that's what I've gotten my kids into as well. And when we get a chance, we play together. And so when you can play with family, that's just a whole nother level. It's a whole nother connection to the music. That's awesome. At what point did you recognize this wasn't just talent, that it was a calling?
Um, it's kind of hard to pinpoint because I was when we started the band with my sisters, we were young and we played our first show, I think when I was 11, and then I was like, "Oh my goodness, this is what I wanna do for the rest of my life." But I don't know if that was just 11-year-old me being really excited about music or if that was something that God was placing on my heart at the moment. But as we started to do it more and more, we went on our first tour, when I was 16, and we were able to actually talk with people for the first time who had either heard our music or this was the first time they were hearing our music and they just wanted help figuring life out. And I was like, oh, this is so much bigger than just playing in a band. And, it kind of continued to grow from there. And like I said, I really thought being in a band with my sisters was what God was calling me to do for the rest of my life. And when that story kind of switched and God was like, "Oh, hang on, there's a different direction I'm gonna take you in now." I fought it for a little bit, but stepping into who Magdalene Rose is now, that was just like there was a shift in the, like, atmosphere of things, and I was like, "Oh, no, this is what I need to be doing. This is way bigger than what I even imagined myself doing," and the conversations that I've had with people, have gone so much deeper, and I've hoped that I've been able to make an impact, but yeah, it just I don't know, it feels like in each season of my life, God will reveal something else to me, and he's like, "Okay, I'm redirecting you for a second. Let's go here now." And it's like, "Okay, I'm gonna argue with you at first, but I know I shouldn't." And then I'll get it. I'll get it eventually.
So do you feel like the change in direction has allowed you to be more who you specifically are, and made God able to use you in ways maybe he wouldn't have been able to use you when you were part of a group with your family?
I think so, because I had gotten really wrapped up in just being a band member, and I really had no clue who I was outside of that. My identity was being a sister, being a band member, and I liked to fade into the background. And we could have these conversations with people. I would talk with people, but when that was all stripped away, I really had no idea who I was left with, and I had to kind of start from the ground up. And my husband was really just awesome in that moment and supported me through all of that. And he was actually the one to encourage me to share the specific things God has done in my individual life. And he's like, "You you are your own person. It's important to find the things that you want to say, the message you want to put out into the world." And I think part of that comes from what God has done in your life. And it's important to share those miracles that God has given to you. That is part of your story. And so once I stepped into the solo artist thing, that's really what we started doing. And I was like, okay, well, let's be specific because I got no clue who I am, but I know what God has done in my life. Let's talk about that, and that'll help me figure out the rest.
That's awesome. So why metalcore specifically? What does that sound allow you to express that other genres might not?
I think there's just a raw emotional intensity that comes with the genre. And, the things that I like to talk about in my music are tough topics. They come from a place of heartbreak. They come from a place of, just turmoil at times, but there's also times where we highlight just the great things in life and we like to have fun with people. And I think this heavy genre gives you access to kind of both of those avenues. And it's something that I just felt drawn to as a listener. And to be able to kind of flip the script because a lot of music in that genre doesn't always have a resolution. There isn't always any sort of way out. And so to be able to flip the script on that and say, okay, we are experiencing the same thing that you are. We have been through this tough moment, but I have found a way out and you can find a way out. There is healing. You don't have to stay here. And I think, I don't know, this genre speaks specifically to a lot of people who are struggling with the same things I've struggled. And so it just makes sense to kind of speak to them in their language, in the language that I understand already as well, through this heavy music.
I'd have to agree with that. I listened to some metal when I was younger and still some today, and I've gotten my son into metal and my daughter, I introduced my daughter to your music and she loves it. Like she's just
That's
taking it and running with
awesome.
it. And so she's actually telling all of her friends about you too. So there's
Oh my
going to be a
goodness.
whole group of kids here that love your music. In addition to me, I love your music as well. And so it you, there is something in metal. It's more of like a raw emotional release that isn't
Mhm,
necessarily accessed by pop or contemporary music. And it in those moments when you're going through some really heavy stuff, it is very cathartic and medicating to be able to just kind of get it out with the use of metal music. And so
mhm.
I have a definite appreciation for metal artists and I listen to all kinds. So, um, have to say, definitely, I love what you do. Keep doing it. And
Thank you.
I love the fact that you're reaching a whole bunch of people that modern contemporary music just does not.
Mhm.
So, who specifically, since we're talking about who you're trying to reach, who are you trying to reach and why them? We've kind of talked a little bit on this, but can you elaborate a little more?
Yeah, I think, just through the struggles that I had been through myself, I think with the band, my goal is to help people not have to go through this same thing. People who are struggling with depression or any sort of mental health issue, people who are struggling with self harm, people who are struggling with eating disorders. I think it's kind of plaguing my generation and the one after me. We've kind of become so, I don't even know, like drowned in mental health problems. And I think it's so important to speak out about them, but to also say, like, it doesn't have to identify you because that's something I also struggle with. I was like, oh, well, yeah, I have depression, but like, I want to make sure people know I have depression and I want to, oh, that's who I am. And it's like, you don't have to be. That doesn't, you can live with depression and it doesn't have to define you. You can be all these other things despite the sickness that you have. And, our music, I think, hopefully speaks to those people to let them know that they're not alone and that they can be so much more than their sickness, so much more than their past, so much more than any of these issues that they're currently struggling with. And um, you know, that doesn't go to say that nobody older than me doesn't have those issues too, because I do speak to people of all ages, and it's really sad to know that everybody is struggling. But I think our music does have a specific heart for younger people, and I just want to pour into the next generation to hopefully help them just prevent all these things that I had to go through. And yeah, I know we write music for people who are hurting, and, there's a lot of people who have completely been healed from things. They're like, "I still love your music." I'm like, "That's so awesome. I'm so glad you do." And so I think it speaks to a lot of just different ranges of people, but, our heart is definitely for hurting youth, and I hope that we're able to help them.
So, what do you feel called to say that others aren't saying?
I think the biggest thing is just talking about things and not just, like, beating around the bush. I think a lot of times it's easy to be like, "Oh, well, this thing is bad, but let's move on because it's uncomfortable to talk about." And it's like, no, let's talk about it. Let's be very open and honest about it. And, we talk about medication and I've shared my story of being medicated and then God healing me. And now I'm medication free, but telling people that doesn't make you any less of a person. If you have to take medication, God can work through doctors. Um, Talking about, getting help you need speaking about your problems. It doesn't have to be scary to talk about self-harm. It doesn't have to be scary to talk about suicide, because if you don't talk about it, you can't get the help that you need. You know, people can't read your mind, but they definitely want to help. And it's just, even though it's scary, it's important to reach out, to try to have some sort of conversation with somebody to get you the help that you need. You know, we talk about childhood sexual abuse because there are friends in my life who have been, victims of that, but now they're survivors, and their mindset has become so strong because they've done the work to heal from those things. And, I think all these like icky topics are very like, I don't know, there's just it's a rapid, like, epidemic happening of all this stuff, and, we can't just brush it under the rug anymore. And, you know, recently I've been talking about judgment for people who dress differently, people who like different types of music, and I think that's always just kind of come with the territory of metal or dressing emo or whatever you want to call it. But I think there's a different side of it that we do need to talk about, where it's okay not to like these things, but to judge somebody and tell them they can't be Christian is completely incorrect. And I think, and if we really believe in making heaven crowded, it, like you said, it really is going to take all of us reaching into all these different music genres, reaching all these different people who may speak English, but speak a different language when it comes to interest, when it comes to hobbies, when it comes to music. And you have to meet them where they're at, because that's what Jesus would do. And I think it's important to be bold about all of those things and not just kind of tiptoe around them. And I think it's really cool because I've seen a lot of bands come alongside us now who are willing to share the same things, willing to speak up about mental health issues. And when everything happened online and kind of went viral a little bit, I had a lot of people who were just like, "Yes, we stand with you as a band, as churches," and that was so awesome to see.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think it's important to name the elephant in the room, so to speak, so that, you can move past it. And I think what you're doing is great, because once you name the elephant in the room, you're also letting people know you're offering that lifeline to bring them out of that isolation and into
Mhm.
healing, which
Yeah.
is more than I can say a lot of pop artists will ever do. It's deeper than that. And this is the turning point for a lot of people in their faith. It can be a stumbling block or it can be a turning point. And I believe that you're turning it into a turning point.
Mhm.
So you brought up the controversy about what happened. Let's talk a little bit about that. There was a couple of churches that canceled some tour stops connected with you. They said that if you played, that they didn't want you guys there, and I, for one, think that's horrible. And I think a lot of people have, they've spoken up and they're on that same train of thought. But from your perspective, what were they actually reacting to?
So there was a few calls over the last few years, well, more than a few, unfortunately. We've done several calls like each year as Magdalene Rose has been a band, of churches either wanting to cancel the show completely or just not wanting to be on the show. Sometimes it's because of the music, but a lot of times it's just because of the dress. And I think that's what people were, getting a little get confused about, because there's a lot of people like, you can't tell people what to play, you can't tell churches what to play. And I am not coming from that position. There are plenty of shows that I do sit out on that we have a conversation with the church at first, and they're like, "It's just not really a fit for our congregation." Our people don't really like that type of music, but that's not anything to say that you're not being used by God. And I'm like, that's totally fine. Sometimes if you have an older congregation, or if you have a congregation that only likes pop music, I'm never gonna force you to listen to something you don't want to listen to. Um, but in this case, the church that specifically canceled, it was just somebody saw the poster after bringing in a Christian rock tour. Like, I wasn't the only rock artist on the bill. Everybody was dressed in black, and it had been booked for a month, and somebody saw it and was like, "You know what? She looks evil. We're canceling the whole show. Like, I'm not having a conversation. We're just canceling it all." And that was the frustrating part. That's why we made the post. And normally we just, you deal with it here, and then we move on, and we hope people will understand that the show is canceled. But my father-in-law, Joseph from Seventh Day Slumber, he was the one who actually got the call, and he tried to have a conversation with the youth pastor, and he was like, "We've already canceled it. There's nothing we can do." Um, and the problem is Maggie. They just don't like the way she looks, and they don't think it can be Christian. And so then Joseph was like, "I think you should make a post about this because if they are having this view of you, we really want to make sure they don't have this view of other people that look like you who aren't artists. And we have the privilege of going to other churches, other clubs, other venues, and finding people that like the music that we play. But if somebody dresses like you or is emo or is struggling in any sort of way, and this is their only church that they get to go to, it's so important that this church's eyes are open because if they turn them away, they don't have that option. They may not have any other support system that they can go to. And it really is, in some moments, cases of life or death because there are plenty of people struggling with suicide. And that's why we made that post just to talk about it because we go into these places and we reach those people who are struggling. And it's not to say that we are the chosen ones who can only reach these people because that is a very arrogant statement. And I don't think that we are the only people that can reach these people. But a lot of times, we do speak with a lot of people who are struggling with suicide. And I think sometimes people don't understand how intense that struggle is or how like rapid that struggle still is. And it's just not always talked about. And so you just think everybody in your community is okay. But when somebody comes in and is like, "Hey, we need to talk about this. If anybody here is struggling, this is the time. Like, you are not alone. You are not in an unsafe place. Like, this is a place where we are supposed to talk about these things." You would have no idea, like, the amount of people that come at the end of the night are like, "Wow, what you really said, like, I am struggling with that." And you're just like, "What? I would have never guessed." And I think just speaking out about that was so important because there were a lot of churches who were like, "Thank you for saying this. I think it is important to reach our youth this way." But I also got messages from people who were like, "Oh my goodness, I didn't realize that I was operating out of so much judgment. I need to really do some like reevaluating here." And I've had people reach out to me and say, "Okay, I've seen all of these people come to bat for you. And if they are like people from the church, maybe I'm willing to give church a second chance because I like what they're saying. I like that they support you even though you look different, even though you dress different, but you speak about Jesus. And I feel like that, but I got kicked out of a church a few years ago and I haven't been back since. But because all of these people are willing to say that that's not the way Jesus would handle things, I'm gonna try and find another church this time around, and I hope it goes better. And so I've been having a lot of awesome conversations, and the youth pastor that actually canceled that specific show reached out to me and sent an apology, and it was really just crazy to see God work in that moment, because that's the first apology I've gotten from any of these churches who have canceled over the years. And I just hope that that kind of, I don't know, makes a change in that city, even if in that specific church. And I've seen a lot of just ripple effects happen online, but it's cool to see somebody who was actually in the situation respond in that way.
Yeah, I think the apology is amazing and you should be receiving way more apologies. But I mean, also going back to the judgment call that he made, I feel like that is a bit of a Pharisee spirit. He's making a judgment call based on what people look like, not what they're made up of. And when Jesus looks at us, he's not looking at what we're wearing or the image that we put out. He's looking at our heart,
Mhm.
and that is more important. And for a pastor to say that, your music doesn't apply to people in our church, that's a judgment call speaking on a large group of people that cannot be accurate. I guarantee you there's at least a few people that listen to metal, and even if they book the show, it doesn't have to be their congregation going. I mean, that's the whole point of booking these shows is you're bringing in people for the capital C church, to be connected and for them to be brought into the family. And it's not about how you look. It's
Mm,
not a fashion statement. And if there's one thing I wish people would do, I wish they would stop making judgment calls based on appearances, because
yeah.
appearances cannot tell you a thing about what that person's heart is made up of. So, do you feel like the decisions were made about you without actually understanding your message? I think we can assume that's a yes, right?
Yeah, I think, the people that when we play shows and I sit out on when we have an actual conversation, I would say those churches, not necessarily because they are willing to, like, get to know me and ask about the music and if they're just bringing in a worship night and I don't play worship covers, then that stuff makes sense. But instances like these where it's just like, oh no, there been no communication, no reaching out to me, even like my father-in-law trying to like have a conversation and be like, well, she can play songs that don't have screaming. She has her master's degree in crisis counseling because we go specifically into these places to talk about mental health. She shares her testimony and stuff like that. It was just like nothing none of that mattered because they had already made their mind up. And I do feel for the youth pastor because I think it was somebody higher up that was just like, I'm pulling the plug. And unfortunately, he was just the messenger. And I can tell in his apology that he really did like I don't know, just have his eyes opened a little bit, and that was something that I was praying for because it's really easy for me to just get angry and then to be like, "Oh, these people just don't understand, it's me versus them." And, my pastor reached out to me and he was like, "You need to let God be your defender, but remember to pray for these people because they don't see it yet." And I was like, "Okay, I need to remember to do that. I don't need to be arguing with people online. Like, I need to take a step back and pray that this church will have understanding, but also the people that are arguing online will have understanding that their eyes will be open because, I want them to, embrace me with compassion. And so I can't really expect them to do that if I'm not willing to extend the same compassion to them. And so I think just those prayers where I had a lot of other people online praying that there would be understanding. I think they really God was working through all of those prayers to speak to this youth pastor and to hopefully speak to the rest of the congregation as well and the other people who were higher up than him. I got a few messages from the congregation and they were upset and they're like, we were really excited about this and I don't know why this happened. We've asked about this decision and they're not giving us any answers. And so I think sometimes there is a little bit more of an internal issue there with these types of things because like you said, there shows there's probably at least a few people who would like this music, and they're just not always included in that conversation. And so I think, yeah, I kind of went on a rabbit trail a little bit, but I think when there's conversations there, that's when they're willing to try to understand it, but the times when they're just not willing to even, like, speak to me, which is hard, I would be more than willing to share my story with these people and, tell them explain why I play the music that I do, why I dress the way I do, and the people we're able to reach, and encourage them even if it isn't something that you like, I would hope that you at least take the time to understand the heart behind it.
Right. What do you think this reveals about the current state of the church? Not that specific church, but church with a capital C.
I think there's definitely is still a lot of fear that we're operating out of, which I think God has called us to not have a spirit of fear. I think He's called us to boldness. And I think sometimes we confuse fear of like unknown things with discernment. And I think it's important to really question, are we taking the time to discern these things or do we just have a bad experience with this type of music or these the way that these people are dressed? Do we have a bad experience with somebody and so we're just making that a blanket statement over everybody else? And on the flip side of it, I was able to see just the body of Christ move in such a big way that I have never seen before. People rallying around me on social media and churches specifically, but also just this whole group of Christians, even in like non-Christian outlets, fighting for my behalf and coming around our band and supporting us in prayer. And, you know, it then like left America and was in other countries and, just this worldwide thing. And I was able to see the church on like a global scale, which was so awesome to see people praying and encouraging and, just reaching out to me. And I have never seen like the body of Christ move like that before. And I was like, that is so awesome. That's what it really means to have this family under God's name. Like this is us rallying together. And I think that was really cool to see everybody be unified for the most part on something like that and really rallying for change. I think that was awesome to see.
Yeah, that was really heartwarming to watch on my end. I was like, all right, another person speaking up for, they know what's right. So, so through all of this, it's kind of shining a light on whether or not churches are unintentionally pushing away young people that Jesus would actually be pursuing. Do you think that they're pushing away people through actions like this, or do you feel like overall, like it was maybe they were mistaken or misled or some other influence?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think there definitely is a good chunk of people that just genuinely are pushing people away because they just don't get the younger generation, or they're just not willing to, put up with the weirdness because I had weirdness growing up. Like, I'll be the first one to admit I was super weird, but I had somebody who was willing to come alongside me, and just kind of point me in the right direction. And then when I stopped going to church because I faced a lot of judgment after that, I had no one to guide me. I didn't have any community. I didn't have anything but me and my family, and that was it. And now that I've found a church, like, it's so important to me at least, because I do feel like there's a lot of more guidance that I have. I have people that I can speak to. I have people that I can be like, "Hey, can you please pray for me? I have no idea what's going on." And I have like a family, but also kind of an army to go alongside you in life. And when we're just not willing to embrace people because they are just weird or off-putting or different, I think that pushes away a lot of people, especially the younger generation, because they've got so much life to figure out, and they're gonna do it in ways that are confusing to you, but it's important to be there for them. And then on the other end, I think that there are people that are just kind of mistaken and, you know, yeah, we're humans. We're gonna say the wrong things. We're going to make the wrong decisions. And I've met a lot of churches who are willing to own up to that, which is really cool. And right in the middle of all of this kind of controversy stuff, we played a show at a church in Beckley, West Virginia, and this whole youth group showed up, and they all had like the dyed hair, they all had face piercings, they all had the ripped jeans, and their youth pastor, well, both of their youth pastors walked in, and they were dressed just like them, and the the lady was like, "Oh yeah, I dyed all their hairs the night before so they could come to this concert and look like the part." And they wanted to have different colored hair. And the guy youth pastor was just like wrangling all of them in. He's like, "Let's take your picture. Like, don't you guys like this music?" They're like, "Yeah." Like, they were so willing to just be with the kids and, you know, meet them where they were at. And I believe the Bible says, "Come as you are." And that was such like a great example of it, and they were willing to just, be the hands and feet of Jesus, and, Paul says to be all things to all people, and I think that is an extension of that, just having a conversation in a language that they would understand, being willing to hear them out, find their interests, and still show Jesus's love through all of that, I think was so cool. And so I I definitely have hope, and I've been able to see a lot of churches that are willing to go the extra mile to reach the youth, and um, gotten the chance to play a lot of those, which is really cool, and it warms my heart because that was something that I needed growing up, and I didn't have that, and so now to see it happening in places, it's like, okay, there's hope. There are churches who are willing to do this, and hopefully their influence will just wash into the churches that don't quite get it yet. And I think they'll get it eventually.
If you're a brand or business or organization looking to align with a message that stands for faith, resilience, and real impact, this is where you want to be. The Relentless Believer podcast is reaching a growing audience of purpose-driven listeners who value authenticity, leadership, and transformation. We're currently opening the door for a select group of sponsors who want more than just ad space. They want meaningful connection with an engaged audience. And this is about strategic visibility, aligned messaging, and being part of a conversation that matters. If that's you, I invite you to connect with us. Visit relentlessbelieverpodcast.com or reach out directly to start the conversation. All right, welcome back. Let's talk about something deeper. Appearance versus impact. You've said that some reactions have been based on how you look or present yourself. And do you think that that should play into it? How do you respond to that?
I think there's definitely, a part of me that understands. I think, seeing a girl who wears crazy makeup, who has a band who all has tattoos and has loud music, I think there is a bit of it where I would understand if I just did not get metal music, if I'd never listened to it before, it'd be like, "Oh, you guys look scary." But then taking a second, past that, take a breather, and then you can, like, I don't know, just have the discernment and conversation after that. Give yourself a moment to react and then make a decision. Don't make a decision in the middle of your reaction. Um, because there are people that, dress like us, look like us, band like us, who don't care about God, who aren't talking about God at all in their music. And, I think it's important to figure out what band you're talking to. But there are also people who look like us, a lot scarier than us, who are the biggest sweethearts, biggest teddy bears. You would never, like, they would never hurt your feelings. They love Jesus so much, and, like, they could talk circles around you in scripture. And so I think from an image perspective, I think that's so important to know, like, this is this outward appearance doesn't define, like, their theology. It doesn't define their knowledge of scripture. It doesn't define their relationship with Jesus. And, people are very quick to pull out the verse that says, like, abstain from all appearances of darkness. But in reality, that's not talking about clothes. It's talking about, your actions, stay away from evil, stay away from promoting evil things. And, I don't think it's talking about clothes and makeup at that point, because the color is just a color. And, Satan was an angel of light. And, there is so much stuff that we get confused about or twist in order to kind of approve our own agenda. And I think it's so important to not do that. And, your Bible talks about meeting people where they at, coming as they are, but also that God looks at your heart and not your outward appearance. And there's so many things, like, if we really wanna get nitpicky, like, shouldn't even be wearing some of the clothes because they're not in the Bible or whatever. Like, people are so quick to say, "Well, it's not in the Bible." It's like, "Yeah, well, neither were cell phones, neither was Facebook." So, like, what are we talking about right now? Like, um, so I think it's
Well, and I see it as, we have all different appearances, and
yeah.
someone who looks like you is going to reach a kid who also dresses like that. They're not going to
Mhm.
listen to someone who looks like their mom.
Right. Yeah,
Their ears and eyes just will not be open to that. They will not be receptive to that message. But if they
Yeah,
look more like how they are, they will relate more and they'll be more receptive to that message. And so it takes all
yeah,
kinds. And therefore, you cannot think that there's one specific way that a Christian should look. And,
exactly, yeah.
like my background, I was a little goth kid. And then in college, I was a little punk kid. And you look at me now, you would never know. And so, to find out, like, I listen to metal. Yeah, I listen to a lot of things. But
Yeah.
I mean, it's don't let the jacket fool you. It takes all kinds. And I would literally talk to anybody. It doesn't matter if they look like me or not. And I think those are
Mhm.
the people that I'm sent to. Those are the ones that I talk to, the ones that are receptive, not based on the packaging, but
Yeah.
based on what I have to say and how I relate to them. And then there's
Mhm.
some people, like, you really do have to have the correct packaging in order for them to hear
Yeah.
you. And I think that's great that you come in that particular variety. So, do you think we as a society have created a version of acceptable Christianity that's more about image than transformation? I personally do. That's kind of what my little rant was there, but but how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think there definitely is this kind of, like, expectation where, "Oh, well, if you're a Christian, you have to look like this, you have to dress like this, you can only listen to this stuff, you can only, I don't know, have these certain interests, and if you are anything outside of that, then, like, you're either a bad Christian or you're not a Christian at all." And I think, I don't know, it's just so odd to me because God does not fit into this little box that we've designed for him. He's so infinite and he can use anything. And just because we know Jesus doesn't mean you lose your personality. It doesn't mean that you're not allowed to have fun. Like, fun does not equal sin. And there are so many things where Jesus was so many different things to so many different people, and he was willing to reach the outcast. He was willing to speak to the people who didn't fit in to this, like, pharisaical thing. You know, the Pharisees rejected all these people, and Jesus was willing to meet those people, and he rejected the Pharisees because he was like, "You're not going about this the right way. Your heart is not in the right spot." And, I think that's so important, to talk about because we cannot continue to live like this Christian walk defined by a box. And if we really want to be used by Jesus, sometimes he takes us into uncomfortable spots. Sometimes he takes us into places that we're not used to because he knows that people need Jesus in that spot. He knows that people will need to hear him, and he's going to be willing to use whatever it takes to reach those people. And, you know, a lot of people were messaging me. They're like, I just like hearing the story of the alabaster box and the lady who came and poured this expensive perfume on Jesus's feet. And Judas and the Pharisees were so angry at first, like, "Oh, don't do that." And he's like, "No, let her do what she is doing. She is worshiping me. She is in the right spot. She has the right heart. She's willing to give up her most prized possession because she sees me for me." And if the Pharisees weren't able to do that, they weren't able to see Jesus for who he was. And I think it's important to not let this, like, spirit of religion or, this sort of, I don't know, not quite arrogance, but, you just feel like you are theologically smarter or stronger than people. And I think that's so important to run from that because in that moment you're making yourself God, and it's not your job to have that role. You can't have that role. There's so much stuff that our finite brains cannot understand, and I think it's important to let God be God and let him use things that he wants to use. And if we really believe that everybody needs to hear about Jesus, we've got to be willing to use all the tools that God has set for us.
Awesome. Let's talk about the people your music is actually impacting. What message are you hearing back from your audience? What kind of feedback are you getting from them?
It's really cool because I've been able to, especially for a few specific girls, somewhat mentor them a little bit through social media, and they've come to a concert and they've kept up with me. And some of them have struggled with self-harm, and they're now at least a few months free, if not a year free of self-harm, which is so awesome. I've spoken to girls who struggle with suicide, and they just were ready to just be gone and asked me if, that would make them a bad person. And we've talked about it, we've talked through it, and now they have college plans. Now they have plans, getting a job and moving out and making a life for themselves. And it used to be, "Oh, I don't want to live anymore," and now then it turned into, "Well, I'm only living because I know Jesus wants me to, and I know there's something for me." And now it's, I'm so excited about my life and the future that I have. And this whole just perspective change is so awesome to see. And it's not anything I'm doing because, I could go to all the school I wanted to. I could say all the things I wanted to. If God was not working through me in that moment, it wouldn't matter what I said. But, it's been awesome to see just Jesus reach out to these girls specifically that I've been talking to and seeing their lives change. And, you know, people putting down the razors, people eating again, people, finding like a goal again and finding inspiration to live is so awesome. And there was a sort of a older woman, not like elderly, but older than me, who I was speaking to, and she was one of them that was scared to go to church and would never have gone to church. And then in that moment, asking me for prayer to give her the courage to try again. And, um, people who are struggling with anxiety, people struggling with depression, just being willing to ask for prayer and seeing them come through a spot to be stronger now. And um, girls who are leading in church who never would have stepped foot back in a church because they were also hurt, becoming youth pastors, becoming worship leaders. Like it's so awesome to see them kind of take authority back over their life and just find that hope in Jesus. That's been really cool.
Awesome. So, one of the questions I had was if you thought that the church was underestimating what your audience is going through. And it occurred to me that maybe it's not necessarily they're underestimating, but maybe not addressing some of it. And I feel
Hmm.
like you, as a touring member outside of the church who is still doing the work of the capital C church, that you are almost addressing it in a more meaningful way than the church ever could. But the church definitely could be giving them some more support at that level. What do you think the church could be doing to try and support the people who are following you once maybe they weren't going to church until they found you and you opened their eyes to the possibility of going to church, but they really need that structure and that help. What do you think the churches could be doing to help those kids?
I think it's really important, like you said, to just talk about them. I've been in churches, some of my friends have been in churches who have either been told, like, "Oh, we don't talk about that here," or they've gotten kicked out because they've admitted that they were struggling with suicide, or they've gotten kicked off the worship team because they were struggling with suicide, and I think it's so important to be willing to talk about it, and you don't have to know what to say. You can be scared, that's completely fine, even to admit that. I think that helps more than just not talking about it. But if you are willing to come alongside somebody and let them know, like, "Hey, I have not personally struggled with this. I can't understand what you're going through, but I want to. Can you talk to me about it? Can you give me things that you want me to do? And, can I pray for you? Can I check in with you throughout the week?" Because it isn't just a Sunday conversation. It needs to be a Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday conversation. And, you know, as a church, we need to be willing to invest in people outside of the building. It can't be a one day conversation. It has to be a lifetime of doing life with people. And, being willing to pick up the phone if they are calling and they genuinely need help, like being willing to be that person. And I before I left Florida to move to Nashville, I had found a church who went so far as to add, like, a counseling center to their church, and I know not every church has the budget for that, but just the heart behind it was so cool because they had, I think, 2 or 3, like, actual counselors involved with the church, and they were like, "Let's make a center. Let's make a recovery center or a place for teens to go to who are struggling," and they were teaching some of the congregation who was willing to volunteer the things to say, um, so that the center could be up and running like 7 days a week. And if somebody needed psychological help, if somebody needed like addiction recovery, they knew where to point them, either to the counselors at the church or to resources outside of the church if the church didn't have them. And I think the heart behind that is so cool because they're willing to go into those places and to tell people that their story isn't over and that there is help and that there are resources. And I think sometimes people just don't know that, especially if they are young, they can't really afford therapy. Sometimes their family doesn't want them to go to therapy, and so they're gonna need someone to talk to. They're gonna need to have people to talk to or to just be pointed in the right direction, and, I think that would be so cool. Again, even if churches can't necessarily afford a whole separate resource building, just having people who are willing to find those resources in the area to connect with and to just speak life into especially the youth who either don't know what the options are or who can't afford the options and being willing to be that person, like I said, outside of Sunday service. I think that's the biggest thing, just being willing to talk and being available.
Right. That's kind of the idea behind small groups. If you can find the
Hmm.
right small group for someone who is going through whatever you're going through. And so say there's a kid struggling with anxiety or pain or identity issues or isolation. What do you want them to hear through your music specifically?
I think the biggest thing is just knowing that they're not alone and knowing that their life has value. Even in their struggle, their life has value. And, just because you are struggling with anxiety or you feel like God isn't healing you, that doesn't mean that your faith is smaller than anybody else's. I think there are plenty of stories in the Bible where God was able to work through somebody's pain. And, you know, God is with you at all times. He hasn't abandoned you, and his love for you is so real. And, um, it's just so important to know how valuable your life is. And sometimes getting through the pain, getting through that hard process takes time and it takes courage and it takes hard work. But doing that work and continuing to fight for your life is so important. It's so worth it. That's what I did, and if I would have given up, I never would have gotten to marry my husband. I never would have gotten to play in a band with some of my best friends. I never would have gotten to travel. I never would have gotten to graduate high school or college. Like, I never would have made any of those huge milestones, and my life has so much joy in it now, but I didn't feel that joy for a very long time, and that doesn't mean that God has abandoned you. Um, and it's so important to keep fighting, and it's worth it. And I know it's hard and I know it's scary, but it's worth it to keep pushing through.
Absolutely. So, what responsibilities do Christian artists carry when they're speaking into those struggles?
I think there's definitely a responsibility to be honest. And there are times when we have been touring and I've been speaking about these things openly and I talk about the healing that I've experienced. And then there are times where I'm like, guys, I'm just going to be really honest. Like, today was not a good day. And I have healing in Jesus, but that doesn't mean every day is perfect. And I think it's just important to be honest about the struggles that you are having. But I also do think it's important and it's a responsibility to be an example for people. You can't just be going out here living your life willy-nilly and like saying, "Oh, you love Jesus and you want to impact people," and then living completely the opposite the second you're off stage. And I think that's something that's kind of been a problem in the especially the Christian industry recently, things that have come to light, like people living like don't know Jesus at all. And it's like if you're gonna be putting yourself out there, you have to be there's a responsibility to be a stronger person and to have a community around you who's willing to make sure that you are still living your life according to Jesus. And people are going to make mistakes. We're human. And I think it's important to own those mistakes. And I think it's important to like get better. And I can't, I don't know, I can't fathom going out speaking this life into people and then also just ignoring them after the fact either. I've seen some artists do that, and that sucks. Because if we're coming out here to encourage people, it's important to literally like practice what you preach. Once you're off stage, go and then speak with people and be with people again. You can't just be this rock star. And some people are in it for the fame, for the money, and like that's kind of a different story, I guess, at that point. But if you're saying you're not in it for the fame, you're not in it for the money, you're here to help people, like you have to walk it out. It's our responsibility to be willing to walk it out, even when people don't get it, even when people are saying the same message to you over and over and over again, and it feels like you've been telling them the same advice and they're not willing to take it. Sometimes people just need someone to talk to. And so, you have to kind of put your money where your mouth is and really be willing to, I don't know, just expend your time with people. I think that is a big thing. If you're going to be preaching all of this stuff, be willing to meet people afterwards.
I love that you actually have a heart to shepherd people and that it's not about just performance. There are far too many people who are in it just for the performance. So that's a really great thing to say about you. And also to note, maybe they were making a judgment call because they were looking at your looks, not realizing what you just said, that you really are there to help them along their journey and to relate with them and to care for them. And
Mhm.
so it's really so much more than just performance.
Yeah.
If you're listening to this and you value conversations that challenge, strengthen, and deepen your faith, I invite you to join our Patreon community. Inside, you'll see bonus content, behind the scenes conversations, and resources designed to help you grow in your walk and stay grounded in truth. This isn't just content, it's community. Join our Patreon today. So, looking ahead, what's next for you?
So we are currently on tour. We'll be touring pretty much all year. We've got a lot of cool announcements for shows and for tours coming up that I hope that I can just tell people really soon. I'm having a hard time keeping it a secret. But we also are working on new music, which is really exciting. And I don't have any confirmed release dates yet, but we have a lot of things that we're working on, a lot of songs, a lot of projects. And I think people are going to be really excited about it. The same type of you know, vibe coming from us musically, but then there's also some stuff that we're doing a little bit different. And so I think people are gonna be really, I don't know, excited 'cause it's the same thing, but just it feels like it's maturing as we continue to grow and as we continue to write. And we're adding a lot of stuff to our live performance, which is really cool. Extending songs so you can only hear the song this way live. You can't hear it recorded like that. Um, so yeah, just a lot of big releases that are hopefully coming very soon.
Well, that sounds fun.
Yeah, we get really excited.
What kind of impact do you want your music to have 5 to 10 years from now?
I'm hoping that we become like a staple band that is not just like in people's houses because they like the music, but it's also in people's houses because it makes them feel seen and it helped them through a tough time or it's currently helping them through a tough time. I think that would be so awesome to join the ranks of bands like Flyleaf or Memphis Mayfire or Skillet or any of these bands that you just automatically think of when you think of people who are in that Christian rock scene. And I think that would be really awesome. We're a band that is able to play churches, but we also play clubs and venues that are Christian. And I think that's been really cool to kind of do the crossover thing, because we're willing to go into those spaces and still talk about Jesus and still tell people there's freedom. And I think that would be so awesome to be able to do that more, and I've been able to kind of see that coming for a little bit, and so I'm excited to see where that takes us, where God guides us, and, yeah, I think we're gonna be doing a lot more touring, and we're gonna be doing a lot more, hopefully, international traveling. That would be really cool, but just seeing where God takes us.
All right. So, when all is said and done, what do you want people to say that your ministry stood for?
Um I think I want our ministry to just, I don't stand for boldness and stand for people and being willing to meet people where they're at and not being afraid to talk about the hard things. But after talking about them, being willing to do life and figure out the hard things together. And I know sometimes that's hard to do just through music, but I hope that our band and through social media and through our music that we're able to, come alongside people and give them resources to, fight through the hard things and to come out on the other end stronger for it.
I think you're already doing that. You're doing a great job. So, for someone listening who feels like they don't fit in like traditional spaces, what would you say to them?
I think it's important to know that just because you look different or just because you might like things that are considered weird to some people, you belong in God's family. And I didn't feel that way for a long time. And so it kind of made it easy to feel like an outcast and that maybe it was just me and God and I would feel like I was not included for the rest of my life. But it's so important to know that you are invited to the family of Jesus. And once you have accepted him, there are people who are going to be willing to pour so much love over you. And sometimes it does take a little bit of digging. Sometimes it takes putting yourself out there and facing rejection, but each rejection is one step closer to finding a family that's going to love you so much. And sometimes that is people online, sometimes it's people in person, sometimes it's people you meet in a different city, and then you'll have to somehow find a way to keep up with them. But, God's family is not limited to just looking one way. And so, family is weird. Family is complicated. Family has a bunch of different people. And if your own like personal family looks like that, the family of God is so vast and like there's so many of us included in there. It's gonna look just like that, if not even more like intricate. And there's gonna be more variables to it. And so I think it's just important to know that you do belong, even in the times when you feel like you don't. I promise you do. And I promise you there are people who look just like you and are so in love with Jesus, and they just want to pour out that love to you as well.
I use the analogy of tools when I was raising my kids to tell them about how, they weren't for everybody. It's okay to be different. And
Mhm.
to this day, if someone tells my daughter, "You're weird," she looks at them straight face and says, "Thank you."
That's awesome.
So that was my biggest parenting win right there. But I mean, we're like a toolbox, a giant toolbox, and there's so many different kinds of tools for all different kinds of uses. And sometimes
Mhm.
you're a wrench hanging out with screwdrivers, or a hammer
Yeah.
hanging out with with mallets. They're similar, but not quite the same. And they're all used very differently. And so you have to understand that you might be trying to fit in somewhere where maybe you're not supposed to, but you will eventually
Mhm.
find your people. You will
Yeah.
find other people who love you for who you are and
Mhm.
how you dress and all your different quirks in your personality.
Yeah.
And you just have to keep looking. Don't give up.
Mhm.
Awesome. All right. Well, is there anything else you would like to add?
Um, I think the biggest thing is just if you ever need anybody to talk to, I run all of my social media pages. It's all official Magdalene Rose, and it really is me answering. I spend probably way too much time on there, but I want to make sure that I'm available to all of you. So, yeah, if you need it, it's not a bother. I promise you, you are not bothering me. I promise you, you are not weird. I promise you, you are not like a burden. Reach out to me. It's so important to talk to people. And just you're not alone. And we love that you are here. We love that you are trying and you are fighting. And hopefully I'll be able to see you at a concert. That would be so awesome. But if we never do, just know that I'm cheering for you all the way across the country, all the way across the world, all the way across a city, wherever I may be, I'm cheering for you.
That's awesome. That's sweet. All right. Well, I would like to take a moment to close in prayer. God, we thank you for calling people into spaces that others may not understand, for giving them courage to stand firm in that calling, and for using every voice, every gift, and every story to reach the people that you love. I pray for clarity where there's confusion, grace where there's judgment, and boldness for those who feel called to step outside of what's comfortable. For every listener, meet them exactly where they are. Remind them that they are seen, they're known, and never beyond your reach. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
If this conversation challenged you or encouraged you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the Relentless Believer Podcast wherever you stream podcasts so you don't miss an episode. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Relentless Believer Podcast. If this episode spoke to you, share it with a friend, leave a review, and make sure you're following so you never miss a conversation. Let's keep believing.